think we're going to get started. And before we do, I'd like to have Tim Hall come down and say a few words about one of the sponsoring organizations of this trip, Garden City Harvest. Let's hear it for Tim Hall. Put your hands together.
It's nice to see everybody here on such a lovely night, and I'm sure Ari and the gang are going to take us on a great trip through Brazil. Very briefly, Garden City Harvest helped send this group of folks down to Brazil to study different forms of agriculture in collaboration with the University of Montana and the International Studies Department and the Environmental Studies Program. So, as Tom walks in. Very briefly, Garden City Harvest is affiliated with the PEAS program, which is now a program in EVST. We also run a nonprofit entity that runs community gardens around Missoula. There's 6 different community gardens and tons of opportunity to be involved in volunteering while you're in town. And if you're going to be here this summer, lots of opportunity to get engaged in that. And just wanted to say, if you have any questions or would like more information, I brought a few newsletters with me. Our website is very interactive and up-to-date, gardencityharvest.org, for volunteers and locations and everything else you can do. But without further ado, Ari Laveau and the Brazilian All-Stars. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, my first one tonight is the Broken Valley Roadshow.
Tomorrow night at the Top Hat Broken Valley Roadshow. Looks like a benefit for Garden City Harvest Peas. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all very much for coming. To the Agri-Gringo All-Stars Tour of Brazil. This group right here, mostly of environmental studies students, went down to Brazil last January. And as most of you know, Brazil is a big country in South America. And where that pink arrow is pointing is up with our destination, Salvador, Bahia, the original capital of Brazil, and point of landfall for about 3.5 million slaves. To this day, Salvador is still a real vibrant, colonial-looking city with those hips. You may have noticed that drummer had going on. And I just want to point out that that's not something to try at home unless you've had a lot of practice. Just start young. Yeah. So anyway, there we were, fresh off the plane. So bright, so white, you needed an extra pair of shades to look at us, but that soon changed. This picture was taken on the outskirts of Salvador. At a farm where we decompressed and prepared for the next 3 weeks, during which we were going to study polyculture. And this is the word you're going to see a lot of, hear a lot of. Hopefully not just look at this boring word on the screen, but actually hear a lot of people talk about polyculture in a lot of different contexts. What it basically means in an agricultural sense is growing lots of plants together in the same place, rather than having a row of this next to a row of that, next to a row of something else. Polyculture is an integrated approach to agriculture, which basically means many creatures living together, and not just plants. We noticed that mangoes and chickens, if you've got the mangoes to spare, are a really good combination. The chickens, when one were one to eat one, a chicken that is, would probably taste better. At least that's what I thought, based on all the mangoes they were eating. Another way of looking at polyculture is in the context of human communities. different people spending time together, whether it's on a van ride or a trip or in a community. Yeah, he wanted the bathroom real quick. So anyway, we left Naomi's ranch on the outskirts of Salvador, really excited for what the next 3 weeks had in store, what we were going to learn. And our first stop was south. I better use this little laser pointer, but you can see a little pink line goes south of Salvador to a town called Gandu, which is in the rainforest. And it's a part of the country where they grow a lot of chocolate or cacao. This is a cacao fruit growing right off the tree, which is really interesting, as opposed to off a branch. They just kind of stick out of the trunk. This man right here on the right is named Ernst, and he's one of the founders of polyculture, or I should say, at least he coined the term polyculture. The basic idea has been going on in a lot of different places for a long time, but he kind of brought modern polyculture to Brazil from Switzerland. And the shady-looking character on the left is named Ethan, and he's going to tell us more about what Ernst had to say. The woman on the right, the paler woman, is from Germany. Her name is Uli, and she hosted us while we were in the chocolate rainforest and studying with Ernst. She's got a nice little eco-retreat. The woman to her right, our left, is named Fatima, and she helped cook while we were there, and she lives in a local landless settlement. She's a member of the Brazilian landless movement called MST, which Rita, up there in the top left, is going to give us her perspective on the MST movement a little later on in the presentation. And this shady-looking character in the bottom right, shady because of the big tree she's under, for no other reason. Her name is Beth of the Jungle, and she's going to talk to us about this interesting phenomena of foreigners, mostly Europeans, but foreigners, moving to Brazil and practicing and teaching and generally engaging in polyculture. And that's Jess on the right. She was an integral part of this behind the scenes of this presentation, so I wanted to acknowledge that. Jan on her left, looking at one of many slides they took of each other, of themselves.
Just as a preparation for a future.
Well, you guys were busy working. You were taking great pictures.
Yeah, you guys are good job, way to go.
The buffalo and the
I just can't seem to.
You guys should have seen the millipede that I found this morning when I was walking. It was about that long, about as big around as this.
It wasn't always pretty work. Oh, this is a little note to self. I do have this clipboard right here, and if anyone's interested in more information on overseas trips, you can put your name on there, and or you can email me. Anyway, after our stay in the chocolate rainforest, we took a little boat ride along the coast through some mangrove forests. And this is a fish trap that we saw a lot of. They're dotting the mangrove forest. And basically, it's full of water at high tide and full of fish at low tide. At least they do work. I've lived in a village where we were fed off those fish traps, and it's pretty easy. So here's us on our little boat, having fun. From there, we took a kind of circuitous route up to that topographically interesting place in the middle, which is called Capão Valley. And as you can see, it is a topographically interesting place. And this not shady-looking character, named Jody, is going to tell us about where we stayed, or one of the places we stayed while we were in Capão. Actually, it is where we stayed. It's the only place we stayed. But it's called Lothlorien. And it was called that before the Lord of the Rings movie came out. And we spent a lot of time in the Lothlorien classroom with this woman. Her name is Marsha, and she was my partner in planning this trip. She's Brazilian, although born in Florida, but Brazilian for the last 25 years. And we also visited another community, kind of in the same valley. We communed with them through music and food and all sorts of other things. The woman playing the drum was quite a good drummer. Her name's Rosie. That's Rosie. Hi, Rosie. And she's going to tell us more about Campinas. And then, as usual, is back on the bus to our next destination, this time in the dry lands of Brazil, which is also called the Sertão, to visit what's called the Polyculture Project. and that's Marsha looking at the project. She started this project about 4 years ago, and it's neat to watch her project grow up. And there we are communing with farmers. Wasn't there a slide of Jared? This guy right here in the middle. I don't know what happened to his slide. I can't point the laser pointer at him because that's against the law. But he's going to be talking to us more about the polyculture project. Anyway, as we have kind of surmised, polyculture means a lot of things in the context of creatures living together. As they say in Brazil, toda mistura será permitida, which means every mixture is permitted. And, well, I guess the act of researching polyculture is deciding what is permitted and what isn't, what doesn't work. We got so excited about that we had a party. And some capoeiristas showed up and put on a little dance. And we decided to show them how to party. So we mixed it up as much as permitted. We even square dance with the bill. And this party, I should point out, is in the middle of nowhere. This is a small town and no one ever from outside ever visited. So, and they remembered us from 2 years ago. Remember Zika? Yeah, Zika was there. And I mean, they recognized, they knew we were coming and they had this party planned out. As usual, back on the road again, this time to Marsha's place, also in the dry lands of Brazil. And Marsha bought a piece of degraded land, pretty severely degraded land, about 4 years ago, and she's now putting her polyculture practices into play. And this is Corey, and Corey's going to tell us more about Marsha. And before I hand the reins over to Corey, I just want to say that, yeah, that's when you're supposed to laugh. It was really fun traveling with this group, and you might think that herding a group of 20-somethings around Brazil couldn't be much easier than herding a bunch of cats anywhere, but it was really fun. And they were great group to be with, great group to work with, and so Corey's going to take over from here. The next phase of the trip starts at the beginning, or it should, in Salvador, which is where our trip began and ended. In fact, at the very end of our trip, we went to check out this concert, which was pretty fun. So before I hand it over to Corey, I just want to say a few thank yous. Thank you, first of all, to you guys for coming. Also, thanks to the University of Montana's Office of International Programs for helping support this presentation. Thank you for Garden City Harvest for helping support this trip and administrating the trip. Thanks to the EVST program for providing inspiration and encouragement and generally making this trip and other trips like it possible. Thank you so much to Tom Roy. Thank you for MCAT for making us famous. Thank you for the clipboard, for getting all your signatures. And what follows is we got 7 more 5-minute presentations, different aspects of the trip, through the eyes of the Agri Gringo All-Stars of Brazil. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Corey up here. We'll do a little switcheroo while you guys can watch what we'll do. Unfortunately, you'll have to close your eyes for a second because I need to back up this presentation. We'll take one. Ready? On the count of three, everyone close your eyes. Okay? 1, 2, 3. Closing. Still closed. Still closed. Okay, open your eyes.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, should I pass it around or should I just leave it down? Okay.
Okay. So this is Marsha, our fearless leader. We spent the majority of our time in Brazil with this woman. She is really an amazing woman. She's really one of the only people that I've ever met who can operate and function on a spiritual realm and in the real world at the same time. We spent a lot of time in class learning from Marsha. Her lectures ranged from integrating animals into agroforestry systems, all the way to creative visualization and channeling energy from nature devas. Many feel that she teeters on the borders of mysticism, but yet while some of her philosophies are definitely far out, in my opinion, they are very meaningful and relevant. And like I said before, her ability to function in two different realms really makes her a really very credible source for this type of information. Her first lesson introduced the old paradigm versus the new paradigm. Marsha used the triangle to represent the old paradigm and the circle to represent the new paradigm. Right now, as we speak, the universe is in this huge process, huge change. Shifting from an old stagnant system to a new dynamic and cooperative one. Throughout the trip, these two terms were used frequently among our group, sometime in jest, like when Ari was busting our butts, making us wake up early. Someone was sure to say, "That's so old paradigm." The first night we're all together in Salvador. We did this little activity. Here we are as a class creating a real live example of the old paradigm by building a human pyramid. The old paradigm is hierarchical in structure, stagnant, and based on fear and control. It's much like the economic and societal structures that we see in Latin America today. Very few people exist on the top and rely on those oppressed individuals on the bottom so that they can stay on the top. Fortunately, movements like Movimento Sem Terra, the landless peoples movement that Berta is going to talk about, are gaining speed and mobilizing and empowering those people on the bottom. Here's an example of the old paradigm when applied to agriculture. The plants and the soil are suffering. There's no diversity or cooperation. It is a completely stagnant system. Here, on the other side of the spectrum, is a polyculture plot, the new paradigm. In agriculture, the new paradigm manifests itself in a diverse and dynamic community of plants, animals, and humans. Here you can see that there is plenty of movement, flexibility, and cooperation between plant species. Marsha specializes in a type of agriculture that she calls intuitive agriculture. She believes that the natural systems are already intelligent and have their own archives of information which the farmer can access to help him or her make decisions that are more in sync with the land rather than imposing something foreign on them. Using kinesiology or a pendulum, you can access this information from the system through your own energy body. In other words, you just open up your senses and use what you already know and feel about the land to shape your work with it. In other words, it's just another way to become a better steward of the land. So now I'm transporting us to the very end of our trip where we actually got to visit where Marsha puts all of her theories into practice. This is a place called Marisa. It's also in the drylands of Brazil, the Sertão. And during our short stay here, we learned a lot about how Marsha lives out there all by herself. Well, she has other Brazilians helping her out, but there aren't any other foreigners out there. While we were there, we got to take a donkey ride up the valley, and the area that she used to live she lives used to be Kachinga forest, but now you can see the remnants of the Kachinga forest up in the top part of the photograph. Unfortunately, all of that forest has pretty much been deforested and the soil has been degraded and used for conventional agriculture, old paradigm, mainly just planting corn and beans. Fortunately, Marsha is really creating a buzz and forming a hotbed of alternative new paradigm agriculture out in the middle of this place. She's also in the process of establishing a center of learning and arts on her property and is always looking for visitors. Her mission is taking this degraded piece of land and turning it into a fertile, abundant place. She does this by first planting species that will help nurture the soil and that can be used for mulch. Here in Montana, we use grass clippings or straw for mulch, and mulch is organic material that covers the ground and keeps moisture in the ground, and 10 centimeters of mulch material can hold up to 3 centimeters of water, which is a huge amount in a place that is as dry as this place. The added organic material also adds nutrients to the soil that has been degraded by conventional agriculture. This whole project is a huge undertaking, especially in a place that is so desolate and so dry. But despite these challenges, Marsha has a lot of faith in her mission, and I also have a lot of faith in her. Everyone in our group, we all learned a lot from Marsha. I personally came away with a much better understanding of the possibilities that lay even beyond the organic movement, even beyond polyculture or permaculture. I really became aware of agricultural possibilities that lie in a spiritual realm. My whole experience with Marsha really blew my mind. She was constantly challenging us to ask ourselves how we can live our lives without fear. And she repeated often that unconditional love and cooperation will always result in abundance. She encouraged all of us to believe that we do live in abundant earth. And she has an incredibly strong belief in what she is doing, which was really inspiring. And the other day, just a few days ago, I was talking with Josh Schlotnick outside of the greenhouses at the Peas Farm, and he was just saying how we can't wait anymore for the world to be the way that we want it to be. We have to go ahead and create that world. And Marsha is really one of those people who's doing that. She's creating the world that she wants to live in Marisa, but she's also doing that all over Brazil, and it's benefiting hundreds of Brazilian farmers. This is the Polyculture Project, which Jared is going to talk to you about.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, lots of things to hold. So I'm going to be talking to you guys tonight about the polyculture project that we saw, which was in the dryland, the Sertão region. So Ari has mentioned before, but generally polyculture, it's the community of plants that humans have put together that each has kind of its own function that comes together as a whole to create a good community. This agriculture system mimics or does its best to mimic a naturally occurring system, therefore freeing up potential for the farmer, giving them more personal freedom and power, which is pretty cool that we'll see here. This sign here, it says the wonderful view of the canal, the headquarters of the Association of the Polyculture of the Semi-Arid Region, and it's put on by the Institute of Permaculture of Bahia, which is something that Marsha's really involved with. Initially in this project, there was only a few farmers in one region of Bahia, the state of Bahia that we were in, and now after 5-6 years, it's grown to over 10 regions with a few hundred farmers. So it's really started to pick up and do well. We started our days in Carfanum, staying in this place here, and as you'll see in a minute, it's not quite any Lothlorien. Getting in the van. When we would go out to see these fields, we went out to go visit this one farmer named Joao's fields, and it drew so much attention from the locals that these were all his neighbors that have seen his fields plenty of times, but they were wondering, well, why did a bunch of gringos from Montana come out? And so they kind of came, and so it's sort of this trickling effect. We would come and they would start being like, well, there's something interesting going on here. And soon enough, one farmer would be like, well, let me try a small field. And, and that's how it's grown. It's kind of by this word of mouth, seeing that it actually works. This is the farmer, Joel. He's 28 years old, and he's doing an amazing job trying to prevent this exodus from the younger generation of people away from the farms in the country and into the city. I mean, we see a lot of that out in the West in the United States here, dying ranches and farms, and same things happening there. Lots of people from the big cities, Salvador, Sao Paulo, Porto Alegre, all these big cities, look at the Sertão as kind of being like this sort of poor, crappy place to live, and they're like, why do you want to stay there? But through these efforts, through this polyculture project efforts, it's not so much that way anymore. The younger generation of people are starting to move in. And so he says, if Sao Paulo wants me, they can find me here. This is his house, and he did such a wonderful job building it. Built it all by himself, and there's really no building materials there. So it was, all that brick is adobe. I don't know where he got the concrete, but he's can't really go, find a Home Depot or whatever. There's just no lumber out there. And all that's kind of out front is an agroforest or the beginning stage of an agroforest, which next Ethan will be telling you all about. Like any good community, this community also had its pollinators. These were the native bees, and they didn't sting. They produced a wonderfully liquid medicinal honey that we got to drink right out of the hives, and there's these nice little bees flying around our head. Around his property, he had a living fence, much like you might see a hedgerow in England. I've never been there, but I hear they're nice. And one of the purposes of polyculture is to multitask. So this fence here is showing a great example of that. It's providing a property boundary. It's also a windbreak into his land because it gets pretty windy out on the flatlands, and it's providing a nice thick layer of mulch, which Corey just told you all about. Kind of right down. Let's see if I can figure this thing out. Yeah, right down there. So we walked out to the fields. These fields, the main crop that they're growing in the Sertão is mamona, or castor. So all these plants here and here are all castor, what they make castor oil out of. And in between here is corn. And traditionally conventionally what they do is plant mamona corn or beans and intercrop it corn or beans with mamona. This is what we see as the old paradigm. As you can see on the ground here, there's really no mulch. And for a region as dry and hot as this is, it's getting exposed to wind, and the elements are really getting hit hard, and so the soil degrades pretty quick and it's not able to hold very many nutrients in. Every year castor industry brings about 35 million reais, or at least when we were there, it's about $13 million to this region, which doesn't seem like that much considering the large economy of the country, but for this region it's huge. And because of the low economy in this region, they really don't have the means or money to mechanize this stuff. So, for miles and miles and miles and miles, like eastern Montana, right? This is all mamona, and it's all hand-picked, hand-weeded, hand-planted, and they really can't afford to get any pesticides, so it's kind of inherently organic as well, which is sort of cool. So traditionally these people were yeoman farmers who were growing their own food, and it kind of changed into this older paradigm, changed into this system. And now they have to rely on this money crop to bring their money in, and if it's a bad weather year, or a disease year or something, that crop goes and their whole system is destroyed. So they've turned to polyculture. So this is a young polyculture field here, and horses have dug furrows, these kind of vertical lines, and a cocktail of seeds has been thrown in. This field here is less than a year old. The only work that it really takes is right away you plant, and about once a year they go in there and they kind of make, what's the word they used? Intervention, thanks. They call them interventions. All they do is go out with a machete and kind of cut down some of the seeded weeds or whatever, and that falls down and is used for mulch. This is about a year older, this slide, and some of the plants here, right here you can see some of that mamona, so they're still growing the mamona in with it so they can satisfy that sort of sector. But they're also growing things like palma, which I'll talk about in a minute, and sisal, and there's fruit trees, and right now it's still a little young to see some fruit trees. Here is a leguminous plant here that's giving the soil nitrogen, and so everything else around can benefit from that. This right here looks like maybe a little bit of papaya. I know up here there's some papaya back there and mango and stuff. So right here, it's the first year of fruit producing stage. This field's about 5 years old. These trees, like here's a mango tree right here, that'll start producing this year. As you can see on the ground here, there's really no exposed soil, which is really cool. And all the kind of the functions like coming together, each fulfilling its own function. So this palma right here was planted first, acts as a little windbreak, it falls down later for mulch, it does a really good job. Also, this system kind of frees them up from that money market value. If they, if something happens to the Momona that year, they can go ahead and these plants here called sisal, kind of this aloe-y sort of looking thing, it's really fibrous and you can rip it apart and it's hundreds and thousands of little fibers and they can spin rope out of it and clothing and all these different things. So that if Momona prices fall, they can go ahead and sell the sisal, or they can go ahead and eat off of the mangoes and papayas and different fruit that they see. It kind of frees their system up. So we also went to go see some other places. This farmer here has the same kind of plant scheme as Joao does and most of the people in this region, and is kind of facing the same problems and wanting to do something about it. So this area right here that we're standing in is their chicken coop. So there's probably people in this room that have chickens, and it's just interesting to look at how we do chickens here in Montana and how they might do it here. Chickens are running all around there, scratching up the soil, eating the bugs, fertilizing it. It'd be a pretty nice place to be a chicken, I think. And finally, I wanted to just show that, I couldn't leave this slide out. These girls were just too precious. We kind of attracted the hype, and so they wanted to show us, they were curious, and so they showed us all around their favorite trees to climb. They got us these cool little fruits to eat. And they really wanted to show us how to strike a pose, because apparently we don't really know how to do that here, but they were all about it. So on that note, transitioning, Ethan's going to be telling us more about some of the agroforest stuff I was talking about earlier, and how that's another form of polyculture.
Thanks, Jared. So agroforestry. Jared and Corey told you guys about two kinds of polyculture that are in the Sertao, the drylands area. Agroforestry is a little bit different, dealing with the combination of agricultural systems and forestry systems, and this one was taking place in the Atlantic rainforest. One of the important tenets of agroforestry is that it's a design system based on ecological principles, which means you analyze the local ecological conditions, and then when you mimic those, including mimicking the endemic species, you can not only produce more, have less problems with pests and whatnot, but you can sometimes end up healing the systems themselves, which I can show you in a minute. So this is the Atlantic rainforest. A lot of people look at the rainforest and they say, wow, it's green, it's lush, it's got to be the most fertile place in the world. And it is. It's green, it's lush, it's dense, but it's ephemeral and it's very fragile. This is happening in a lot of parts of the developing world. Brazil's no exception. They're logging and they're clearing the land for conventional agriculture and for grazing. It doesn't really look like a design system based on ecological principles, but here's a reason why it's so fragile when this all disappears. The nutrients in a tropical forest system exist pretty much entirely in the plants, almost exclusively. The soils are millions of years old, they're very fragile, and they hold almost no organic matter. It decomposes almost immediately when it falls because of the high humidity and high temperatures, so it goes right back into the plants and right back into the microbes in the soil. What we end up having is all these nutrients cycling above the soil, almost nothing goes below. So when you remove the tree canopy, what you get is a beach about 500 miles inland. And this used to be a forest. This is called desertification. With no plant cover, erosion quickly takes away all the remaining soil, and it leaves sand. So without plants growing, dying, and leaving mulch, and putting organic matter in the soil, it continues to be lost, and pretty much nothing is going to grow. Now, as I said, thinking of ecological systems based on climatic lines, Of course, on your left is South America, and on the right is an enlarged portion of that. The brown is what used to be Atlantic rainforest. It's about 7 million acres. The green is what's left. It's maybe 4 to 7% based on most people's estimates. Historically, that area was very wet, very lush. Now it's dry, sandy, like I showed you before. Not a very good place historically to grow conventional ag stuff. Now, this is Ernst Gersh. You saw a picture of him earlier. He's a Swiss-born forester and a farmer who came to Brazil 30 years ago with this idea. He said he wanted to come up with a way to have agriculture be economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable, and at the same time, it should bring back the native vegetation. It's a pretty lofty goal, but he's working on it. This is Uli, who's working just down the road from Ernst. She's from Germany, also working there now. Has been working mostly with Ernst's systems, but she's been developing quite a few of her own. Now, again, you saw a picture of this earlier. This is conventional agriculture. You've got one vertical layer, corn. And when it's gone and harvested, you got what you see in front of you. You got bare earth. Nothing's going back into the soil nutrient-wise. No organic matter is going back in there. So what you need to do is keep adding nitrogen fertilizer over and over again. The people in Brazil can't afford nitrogen fertilizer. Well, the opposite is what you saw in the Atlantic rainforest. There's at least 7 vertical layers there, starting down at the ground level all the way up to the emergent trees that rise hundreds of feet above the floor of the forest. Varying life functions allow all these different species to exist together, collecting light, nutrients, and water. And as the plant matter falls, it obviously decomposes, adds organic matter. And long-lived fruit-bearing and nut-bearing species are going to dominate. So the Ernst Gersh agroforestry system basically is the following. You start with a clear patch of land, and it's cheap there because it's been pretty much denuded of vegetation because of cattle grazing, so it's pretty easy to come across bare land. You look down the road and see what you want to have based on fruit tree species and whatnot, and then you take all these thousands and thousands of seeds in about a 2-hectare plot of land, and you throw them out. You plant them all at once. You get your pioneer species, your intermediate species. You got species like that emergent tree up top that takes 100 years to grow. You still plant those at the same time. And then you let the plant's function be your guide. Ernst and Uli will tell you that each plant has at least one function, but usually they have quite a few. The main function could be giving you food, giving your animals food, but they can also be mulch. They can also shade the ground and protect the soil, and on and on and on. So whenever that plant has fulfilled its function, you cut it back, you perform an intervention, like Jared said, and you let the next species come along. So first of all, you have something called manioc. Manioc is this starchy tuber that's pretty much the staple for every meal in this part of Brazil. It grows on the sides of freeways. It grows pretty much anywhere. So this, you can notice the mulch on the ground, and that's covering the soil and adding organic matter back in there. When the manioc dies back, about 2 years later, you got pineapple. Pineapple is a understory species, grows in the shade, starts producing about 2 years down the road, and the full-grown pineapples are not much bigger than that. But unlike the ones we have here, the center is soft, so you can eat the whole thing. You don't lose half of it to a core and whatnot. After the pineapples start going back, you start getting your vertical height, and these are your banana years. 2 to 6 years, you get lots of bananas, another staple there. Bananas are actually an herbaceous plant. They're not a tree, so they make really good mulch for the soil as well as fruit production. Mangoes start about 5 or 6 years down the road. They're not quite that big, but they're big. And they're prolific. I mean, each tree will give you thousands of mangoes. At the market, they were something like the equivalent of 40 to a US dollar. They're everywhere, but they're another staple there. And as Ari said, you can also feed them to your livestock. Any farmers that can afford chickens will graze them under their mango trees. You also got cacao. This is the pod that's coming off the tree, and that's the raw chocolate, fermented chocolate beans on the left. It's a value-added product that the farmers can have, and it allows them to harvest a raw product and bump up the value. Cacao, interestingly enough, like Ari said, grows off the side of the tree. It's also pollinated by mosquitoes, so think about that this spring when you're slapping them on your arms in the garden. Cashews are another one, value-added product. They need to be shelled and roasted, and those start taking over as the bananas are dying back. Now you've got a cashew crop. Jackfruit are huge. bigger than my head, spiky, tastes like bubble gum. A lot of people feed them their cattle too, and Ernst, being an enterprising Swiss guy, is not only into the cacao, but he's been feeding this to his cows, and he's trying to come up with a really tropical flavored cheese. It hasn't hit the markets yet, but it's another value-added product. And then Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts are way down the road. I mean, you can't even think about them for 40 years. But those trees that you planted that come up 40 years from now when you're 70 or 80 years old, these farmers can go out there and all they have to do is one time a year go out there with a rake up the nuts and take them to market. So it's a very long-term thinking process when you're looking at this. Now Ernst would tell us that, he's probably telling us right there, that we don't farm plants, we employ their functions. So you look at a plant, even a weed, there's no such things as weeds, he says. You look at something and if nothing else, it's giving you organic matter for the soil. But once it's served its purpose, you perform an intervention with the machete, which they call a cow down there, and anything that you want to say is big, you say ow at the end, and the louder, more obnoxious the ow is, the bigger it is. So when something's fulfilled its role and you perform the intervention, you cut it back and you let it return to the soil. And by working with the plant's function instead of against it, it creates a system requiring little work. Here's a piece of Ernst's land. Really quickly, this is about a 2-year-old agroforest plot that he had. You can see the manioc right in there, just starting to die back, and the pineapples are probably starting to take over. This is about 4 years down the road. You got your fruit trees coming up. The manioc is long gone. The pineapples are probably starting to max out. And then right here is about a 6-year-old plot with producing banana trees and whatnot. And back here is what the forest hopefully will look like 50 years from now when Ernst is out there raking his nuts. And the reason that you sow 1 or 2 hectare plots at a time is that if you keep doing this, every 2 years you're always going to have a manioc crop. You'll always have these fruit trees. You'll always have bananas. So that it's just a constant cycle if you have enough land, that is. Now, what does this mean for Montana? We can't grow mangoes here. The Peas Farm is not going to have cacao in the CSA next year. But this is a hedgerow. This is Uli's big thing. Hedgerows can be grown right here in Montana. They can provide mulch for the soil. They can fix nitrogen for the soil. They can be food for your animals. And they go right between the rows of crops that you already have. They also serve as windbreaks, as Jared said, and can lower daytime temperatures and raise nighttime temperatures for your crops, which is important in Montana, where it drops 30 degrees in a minute. And then this is a familiar sight for us on here. This is an orchard. We grow some of the best apples and cherries in the world here. What this farmer probably did, it looks like they raised a hay crop in between the trees, and they probably sold it or fed it to their cattle. But what if they had put in something like a green manure cover crop? This is black medic, which grows in Montana. It's very drought tolerant, great ground cover. And then what if they stuck in some corn or maybe some tomatoes, something to diversify their orchard? And then they thought, well, shoot, raspberries sell really well at market. I'm going to grow some raspberries in the shade of my apple trees. And then they listened to Jared and said, well, the chickens would love it in there. And they could peck around and clear the land. And then they figured, well, why would I want to take the hay out of the orchard, feed it to my cows, and drag the manure back to the orchard when you can just drag your cow into the orchard and have it do it all right there? So we can have agroforest systems, maybe not tropical agroforest systems here, but we can do this kind of thing in Montana. And it's people that are going to be doing this, they're going to be getting ahead in the sustainable ag world, and that's probably going to be the future of sustainable ag around here. So next, after we're done talking about plant polycultures, Jody's going to come up and tell us about some human polycultures that we got into later on.
After learning so much about agroforestry and polyculture, we were all pretty tired, but fortunately we had yet another 8-hour bus ride ahead of us so we could catch up on our rest. I have to throw this in, even though I might go over my 6 minutes allotted. This was the nicest bus we were on our whole trip. So the other pictures that you've seen, that's pretty much how we traveled. We didn't have this kind of luxury all the time. But we were on our way to the Chapada Diamantina, or Diamond Mountains. And Ari Laval, our fearless professor, was who was guiding our trip as he did all the way across Brazil. And as promised, the long trip was worth it. It was breathtakingly beautiful here in the valley. And part of the Chapada Diamantina National Park is where we were at. It was founded as a national park in 1985, and the area is very important to Brazil due to its contributions to the water supply. At an altitude of 1,000 meters, the valley is encircled by mountains that, although originally mined for diamonds, now are prized for their veins of crystals. And eventually we arrived at our destination, which was the retreat of Lothlorien. Sonia and her brother Carlos run Lothlorien. Sonia is the only remaining founding member, which was begun in 1984, and outside influences such as taking care of aging parents and the desire for easier lifestyles, coupled with internal disputes amongst the members, and separated the original group. However, even today, all members participate in varying ways. And they had originally based their principles on those of the Scottish Findhorn Foundation, and those same principles remain an integral part of their day-to-day functioning 20 plus years later. They have become their own community within the community of Kapau, and this is accomplished by donating their time and resources to a range of services for the local community, including running the only public library. They provide free medical attention on a weekly basis, and this is the only doctor for miles around. He was an original founding member, comes back to the valley every Friday, and for free will see any of the people in the valley that need his attention. They also run a preparation for birth group for all the pregnant women, and they started the area's first school. And the town now runs the school, but they donated the land on which it resides. And they're also active in the business association that is helping to shape the ecological future of the valley. A major goal is to protect the natural resources that, mostly through tourism, are providing the area's local income. They've already realized that the ecological condition of their area is directly tied to their economical well-being. But one of the main objectives at Lothlorien is to host guests, providing them with an opportunity for intimate contact with nature and also to get to know the local community. And speaking of lodging, after our long bus ride, we were pretty happy to settle into our new digs and begin our day. Our days at Lothlorien began with yoga and meditation, and then with breakfast eaten at communal tables. And each day, of course, we'd fill our water bottles from approved water sources before starting out, and then we would start the day's work. And part of the task was to create plant-friendly fertilizer from available materials, and this was a great lesson for us to bring back to Montana. They just literally used whatever was around. They bought very little manure to add to it. It was incredibly cost-effective. And every day we would stir it, and we would all add a little love to the mixture. But since this was a class focusing on agriculture, some of us worked in the garden, implementing many of the principles taught to us by Marsha. And we also harvested naturally growing crops like the jackfruit. These were plentiful, and as Ethan said, their insides tasted like bubble gum. Later on, they took the nuts out and they roasted them and ground them up into like a meal, and it was very high in protein and a completely different flavor. So the fruit's very diverse, and they grow everywhere. But not having much of a green thumb, I branched out and found a new talent working with wood. And what touched me the most was their version of recycling. I've always been really proud that I'm a recycler. When I lived in Seattle, you had your little green and yellow and blue bins. And in Montana, I'm down to BFI. And my roommate Jen and I haul our glass to Spokane, and we pat ourselves on the back. And we don't have clue one about recycling. I do have to say, I created window frames, a bench, and a gate, all out of pieces of wood that have been used several times. This was just, whoops, what happened to my bench and my gate? There we go. This was their, who knows, second or third lifestyle or life. Now I'm all flustered because I lost my thing. But if there was life left in a piece of wood or a nail, they taught me how to extract it. And our consumerism lifestyle here in the States has made reusing items unpopular and unnecessary, because if we actually reused the items several times before we discarded them, what would we buy today? Just a thought for you. So after the morning's work, our outstanding chefs, and they would prepare our morning meal. And yet another afternoon would begin, only here they were ours to do as we pleased, and we spent many of them visiting the local famous tourist spots, such as Aguas Claras, and the area's most famous site, the Cachoeira da Fumaça, meaning waterfall of smoke. a waterfall that takes its name from the fact that spray clouds drift upwards as if they were smoke, evaporating into the air instead of cascading into a river or lake. It's Brazil's tallest waterfall that doesn't hit the ground. What moisture does accumulate has fallen 1,384 feet into the Poco Encantado, or Enchanted Well. And the Enchanted Well is 120 feet deep, but it's so crystal clear that it said you can see the stones and the tree stumps that reside on the bottom. And there were other waterfalls on our list of afternoon destinations, and we didn't care how famous or how tall they were, we loved them all. There are many other activities besides waterfalls that draw visitors each year to this area. They include biking, hiking, cave diving, rappelling, horseback riding, just to name a few. The land is incredibly diverse. And in my opinion, the Chapada Diamantina National Park is absolutely breathtaking. This is the Cachoeira de Fumaça. But alas, we did have to study. So class was held back at Lothlorien, and it was really rough work. Marsha instructed us on her theories of vertical space and intuitive agriculture, which you've already heard about. But all too soon, our time at Lothlorien was up, and we headed down the road to the community of Campinas. And Rosie's going to tell you about Campinas.
What? While we were staying at Lothlorien, we had the opportunity to visit another intentional community, Campinas. Campinas was very different from Lothlorien. There's much less structure to Campinas. People are constantly coming and going. A lot of the visitors are from entirely different cultures, which contributes to the diversity. The visitors all work, and they pay 35 reais a week, which covers the cost of food, which is a little more than $10. The visitors and the residents all work 4 hours in the morning for the community, and in addition, many of them have developed projects that they work on in the afternoons. This woman sells acarajé downtown to make her food money. Acarajé is a hot dish sold on street corners in Brazil. One of the projects, oh wait, this is in the wrong place, but this is a salad that they made for us when we had lunch there. One of the projects developed by some of the full-time residents is selling dried herbs. This is one of the drying racks that they use. This project has been really successful, and they're currently expanding this project. Jatoba is the plant that Uli named her farm after, which is the woman that Ethan told you about. This is a project they work on in the mornings to support the community. They received a government grant to grow young trees from seed. The trees are then given to people to reforest their land, especially farmers in the riparian areas. Another of these projects is a pizzeria they have started in town nearby. The vegetarian pizza is quite popular, and I've heard that it's really good. One of the main problems they have is a problem of economics. Their future is uncertain. The government grant that I told you about for them to grow trees is not currently reinstated for the next year. They do have other sources of income, such as people like us going to tour their place, but they can't support themselves on just that. In fact, the community of Campinas has nearly failed several times. It's taken a lot of work to get them where they are. These are the chickens that they raise for eggs. They also provide a great fertilizer for the soil. They rotate this pen so the fertilizer benefits a larger portion of the garden. They also provide a school for the younger children there. They do all of their own construction, and the glass bottles right there for windows are filled with colored water. This is a sauna that they heat with fire. While we were there, we went swimming in a swimming hole right over there. It was really beautiful. A lot of aspects of their life are really wonderful. They also have a bike shop, much like Free Cycles Missoula, where people can make, repair, and learn about bikes. They only have one motorized vehicle there, and it is very old, so most everyone commutes by bike, even the kids, and the town is a ways away. This is their kitchen. They do communal meals. We had a wonderful lunch while we were there where we ate that salad that I showed you earlier. This woman, Nadine, showed us around a lot of Campinas. She took us through the gardens. We were really interested in the agriculture in Brazil, as you've seen. A lot of the plants were really foreign to us. Even familiar plants look different. This is an aloe vera plant. The flower is really beautiful. I'd never seen anything like it before. This man in the yellow shirt, you can kind of see, was another one of our guides. He told us a lot about the personal aspects to community. I was really impressed with Campinas. It's a lot of work to create a community like that. They're about 15 years old. It was fun for us to experience the pleasures of group living for a while, but it wasn't always perfect. Problems came up. We fought about little things like clothes mix-ups. Campinas has meetings every week to deal with issues like this, dole out chores, and have a space to bring up any problems that they might have. Marsha, our teacher, gave us 2 rules for communal living. She has spent a lot of time talking to people in communities and experiencing community in her daily life. These are her 2 rules. She's also told us some potentials for conflict in communities. Marsha has spent much of her life experiencing community, like we are here, and talking to others about community. While they are a lot of work, I have really enjoyed the time I have spent in communities and think that they are a really great way to live. Nearly everyone we talked to in Brazil was either in a community or wishing they had more of one. Community and family seem to be more prevalent in mainstream society in Brazil than here. Next, Beth will talk about foreigners in Brazil and their impacts on Brazilian plant and human communities.
As you've noticed, a lot of the people we stayed with and were taught by were not Brazilians, and this might seem rather strange since we're in Brazil. However, these people have the means and the money to buy their land, and this is why they are now working with the Brazilians to create new connections so that they can implement these new paradigm beliefs. One of the first places we stayed was the Mata Atlantica, and that's the Atlantic rainforest or the chocolate rainforest. We stayed with a woman named Uli from Germany, and she is working as basically the public face for Ernst, who Ethan spoke about. And she's really trying to promote ecotourism in the region and also promote the whole CPR, conservation, preservation, restoration. One of the things she taught us about was how to use all the materials on your land that you have. An example of this was adobe. You can see it's a rather messy process. She showed us how to cut clay out of the hillside, and you then cast it into forms using water and then jump in and get dirty, basically. After that, it takes a few days to dry, and then you have to cut it into bricks. And it's just a long process, but it's a great example of how to use your materials. As I said, she's working on ecotourism, and she showed us some examples of ideas she's been developing. Since we left Brazil, Uli sent me several emails. She's been traveling around this part of Bahia, trying to get local small communities involved. One of the things that we did, we took a half-day hike through the rainforest, and there's obviously no trail, so she had her machete, and the plants, a lot of people wondered why environmentalists would be going through the rainforest chopping down plants, but it regenerates very fast, so we weren't damaging the fragile ecosystem at all. It was a really cool experience. We had to cross creeks and go across decaying logs and just interesting things, and parts of the rainforest floor would basically break apart under your feet, which was interesting as well since the soil is so fragile. It was a great open air atmosphere for a classroom to be out in nature and learning about the biodiversity that exists in this region. Very new paradigm. And also another thing that we did was we took a boat ride, as Ari mentioned at the beginning, and we got to go through mangrove swamps. It was about 2 hours there. We went to a small fishing village. And this is one of Uli's main goals right now with the ecotourism. She wants to take people on these boat rides, educate them while you're on the boat. You get to see amazing sights. And then you go to a small fishing village, you have lunch there, buy little trinkets, and you're providing these small communities with a source of income, and this revenue really helps them. Next, we took a 20-minute hike through the forest to Ernst, which Ethan talked about. Ernst has a lot of new theories and everything that he's been implementing. He has over 1,000 hectares of land that he's acquired, so it's quite substantial. With these theories, one of them is that there's no weeds. There's no non-native species, which people in EVST, I'm sure, would argue about, and we did. We asked him about knapweed, and he said, employ its function. And in doing so, that just caused basically a big debate, but you have to employ the function, and there are functions for everything. He says that it's not going to be non-native because it's coming across the border, let's say from like Argentina to Brazil. You can bring plants from the same tropical regions into that region and it will still function. Moving on, Ernst also is working with the community. He gives small plots of land to people who work for him and allows them to try out his theories. He claims that he can tell if a people really believes in his theories by how their plot of land is doing. Along with the non-native species, he realizes that he is a non-native within this community. And he says, if you're going to eradicate all the non-natives, I'm going to be the first person to go. Marsha has been mentioned quite a bit, and she actually grew up in the US in Florida, went to school there, then farmed in Switzerland for several years. Then she moved to Brazil. She's been there for over 20 years. And she has helped found the Permaculture Institute of Bahia and also the polyculture project that Jared spoke about. This polyculture project is not only bringing these different plants together, it's bringing the communities together. And that's a very important aspect. It's also important that this foreigner is working with these Brazilians, teaching them these new beliefs. And you saw those pictures. The village literally followed us around. So it was a very interesting experience to have all these people staring at the gringos. Marsha is implementing her beliefs on her land. It's very brave of her. It's very degraded. And she is the only foreigner in the region. All the Brazilians know her. We went to a market there. She said to us, they're going to know you're with me, and they did. They asked us if we were with Marsha. One of the people we haven't spoke about her was Marcia. She was our logistics coordinator, and she was essential to helping us out. She was a great asset to everybody on the trip. Whenever we were homesick or lonely, she always had some interesting things to say to cheer us up. She was just a great person to have met. As you've seen, these foreigners, unlike many Brazilians, are able to buy land, and this is hard, and Britta is going to talk about this. And there's a movement called the MST, or the Landless Peoples Movement, and they're working towards trying to buy land.
All right, how's the volume? Okay. Well, it's been an hour. Hopefully you guys are all here with me. It's the last leg. So, all right, so while we were gallivanting around Bahia with, and of course learning from affluent foreign agriculturalists, we had the opportunity to meet Fatima, a local woman who told us about the Brazilian struggle for land and about a different kind of community. We met Fatima was staying with Uli in the Mata Atlantica. And on our way there, we passed the black plastic tents that are characteristic of the Movimento Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra, which translates to the Landless Rural People's Movement, and as you've heard, is often referred to as MST. Fatima has been a part of the movement for 8 years. However, it has been around for around 20 now, with around 1.5 million members, and is present in 23 of Brazil's 27 states. The MST is quite different than the radical revolutions characteristic of Latin America's past. Instead, MST works through civil society to pressure the government for agrarian reform, because as you can see, Brazil continues to be plagued with the second largest land concentration in the world, the problems of which stem back to Portugal's colonization and have been perpetuated through a series of land settlement and economic policies that continue through today, such as the mechanization of agriculture, which has led to reduced need for labor. And without money, laborers do not have the ability to buy land and flood into Brazil's urban centers. And also economic and trade policies that favor large landowners who produce goods for the market. This makes it increasingly hard for small farmer and has left a lot of Brazilians landless. So as I said before, MST is pushing to modify the existing political system, not to overthrow it. And their most effective strategy for getting land for the landless has been through the occupations. Trained MST activists will target specific lands, and then they'll go around to the surrounding communities and try to recruit the poor rural workers to live on the occupations. The legal backing of which is in the Brazilian Constitution, which states that only properties fulfilling their social function will be legally protected. In other words, unproductive lands can be appropriated by the government. At the 2003 World Social Forum in Porto Alegre, Noam Chomsky called the MST the most important and exciting popular movement in the world. However, the occupations are certainly not without their problems. The main concerns are disease, hunger, and violence. Many occupations are broken up and several people are evicted, and there have been several murders. However, people are persistent. And Fatima told us about a community that had been forcefully removed by the police and their camps destroyed 8 times. But Fatima's case was an exception because she only occupied the land for a short time before the government bought it from the landowner, and they faced no violence from the police. This is probably due to the cacao crisis at the time. There's a lot of cacao, which is chocolate, grown in the Mata Atlantica. And in 1988, when Fatima settled in the occupation, the price of cacao fell, so the landowner was probably more than willing to sell their land to the government. So every occupation is different, and they have different community dynamics and different hardships. However, there have been several successes within the MST movement. It has won more than 5 million hectares for over 250,000 families. And as I speak, there's 200,000 families currently occupying land. The direct action of the movement has also given people who are normally very marginalized the ability to take more control of their lives, and has served as a means for people to pursue resources and has increased their access to government. It has also raised the status of women and younger generations through the direct participation in the movement. And so after families win the land that they've been occupying, settlements are set up. Each settlement is different, and they face many hardships. Most have community gardens as well as individual plots for each family. And the type of agriculture depends on the region and the individual settlement. And there's usually some kind of production or cooperative setup so that can bring some money into the settlements. And education is also a very important aspect for MST, and they usually establish their own schools on the community, on the settlements. Infrastructure such as water, electricity, sewage, housing is also very essential, and it is somewhat ironically dependent on government funding. So one can imagine the diversity when bringing so many people from different regions into these communities. That's why there's an active creation of community within the movement, and these are complete with group norms and expectations, and a really interesting culture actually exists on these communities. And from the beginning, the MST activists envision a struggle that goes beyond the demand for land. As you can see on this flag here, the symbolic figures, and this reads, "Proletarians of the world unite." This is work to link those who have won land through the occupations and those who are still struggling for the land. Forming community has been one of the most important strategies for the movement, and as we saw in Lothlorien and Campinas communities that Jody and Rosie talked about earlier, community is a lot of hard work. The communities and activities of MST movement is just another glimpse into the dynamics and diversity of community and agriculture in Brazil. And with that, I'd like to invite any questions from the audience that you have for any of us, as Ari puts it, agri-gringo all-stars.
Could all the presenters come up and field any questions today you might have, if you have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Vicky.
Question for Britta about MST. Did it recognize that some land needs to be left in the natural state to perform ecological functions? It's not unproductive land. I mean, if all the land that's being farmed is not available for occupation, and all the land is in natural state is considered unproductive, then eventually it all gets occupied.
Yeah, that's actually something that I talk to a lot of people about, because in the Constitution that it says that the land has a social responsibility to be productive, and that's actually a policy that has been, in a lot of other countries, and it definitely has its problems. I think that for right now, there's a huge immediate problem of a lot of poverty in people, and I think that whether it's good or bad, takes precedence over land fulfilling, those kind of needs. But it does. There is some push for organic and polyculture as far as agriculture is concerned on those communities. But as far as leaving land ecologically intact or trying to increase that's not something that's being directly addressed by MST right now. It's the immediate concerns of huge poverty and people not even having the means to feed their families.
Any other questions?
The Scottish Findhorn Foundation was their original principles. Findhorn. And it actually, if you're interested in more information, it has its own website, Findhorn Foundation.
Okay. Yeah, the Findhorn community, I don't know how many of you have heard about it. They kind of put themselves on the map by all of a sudden growing these amazingly sized vegetables up in northern Scotland. And nobody could figure out exactly how they're doing it. To this day, I think there's a lot of debate about it. But it's become a center of migration, pilgrimage. A lot of people go to Findhorn just to check out the amazing vegetables that grow up like an Arctic Circle. And there's probably other people in this room who know more about it than me. Who wants to comment, please do.
And Sonia went there, the woman that I talked about that we stayed with. She actually went there, and that's part of her basis for founding the center.
Anything else? He's got another one?
Did Ernst figure out how many acres he needed to, completely support a family of four, something like that, using agriculture?
It's interesting because he did have his theories where he wanted something to be socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable. So we didn't get that far with it, but what he's doing right now is he makes a lot of money traveling around the world speaking, and he also makes a good amount of money from his farm. And what he's doing is he's keeping those two accounts completely separate, and he's analyzing how much money he's got coming in from his farm and how much, so to make sure it's paying for itself. So he's working on it. I don't remember him. I mean, he's got over 1,000 hectares that he owns. A lot of that's in transitional whatnot, but intensively, his banana and cacao operations. I think that was like a couple hundred hectares.
Yeah.
But to add to that too, the process, kind of Ernst's process, you're never really a farmer of all of that, kind of as Ethan was saying. So you're kind of like first a farmer of manioc and then pineapple and then banana. So you're kind of like you're focusing on one thing. So for the case like what you brought up for a family of four eating, he would, when he gave the plots, he would give maybe a half a hectare or so to individual people, and they could plenty feed themselves off that. But then what they would be eating for the first 2 years, that family would be eating primarily manioc at every meal. And then for the next couple of years, they'd be figuring out a lot of creative ways to eat pineapple in 4 or 5 years. And then it would be bananas. So you don't need very much land because as each thing comes up, it's really prolific. Like bananas, you can eat in a lot of ways.
We did.
Yeah. So,
but were they raising enough so that the surplus provided sufficient cash to buy the rest of what?
Sure.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And part of the answer to that is complicated by the fact that Ernst cacao is organic, but the global market gives practically no benefit to organic cacao. So he's kind of waiting for the market to catch on and start paying more for his cacao. He's a little frustrated right now because he believes that he's producing a lot of superior product, not just cacao, bananas too, to what the market will, his is superior to what's normally most commonly out there, but the industrial economics at play just swallow his product up and mix it up with everybody else's product. So that's a really good question that we have there. As my friend Ken said, the best way to pay yourself as a farmer is to just grow your own food and kind of try and sell it. And that's, I think that's his primary goal, is to get people around, in his area used to the fact that you can actually have a forest, and it's like a big, tall forest that's productive, that can sustain you, and that you don't need to cut it down to survive and thrive.
Are they doing much work on local economies and local currencies and so on there? Trying to make the local area feed itself, and not just producing anything for export.
Well, there are cooperatives between similar growers in some areas, like cacao growers and whatnot. They're still having problems getting hold with the big corporations who can leverage them away from that. And there are a number of communities that are trying to assemble that. It's in the works, but in the areas that we were at, there was no set structure where, like, say, one person would say, well, I'm gonna, well, my mangoes are good, so you'll have pineapples. Unfortunately, a lot of times you can go to the market and, like I said, mangoes are 40 for $1. Everybody's got mangoes, so it doesn't do you any good to haul them to the market. There needs to be a lot more planning in that regard.
And he's really hoping that, more like a rising market for organic cacao, for example. Again, this is international, but nonetheless, would, encourage more people locally to stay on their land and not migrate to cities. I think his first priority is just to stabilize the destruction of the landscape, and he's keeping track, like you said, how the cash flow is working, and he's still pretty new at this. Ironically, he's not that into people for someone who's so in the community. I'd like to be left alone. But yeah, that's
tree harvest part of the system? At this 40 years, he's 80 years old, if you can pass on whatever, is there a point where it all comes down and starts over again in his system?
It's definitely possible. I mean, you could take it all down in 6 years. Like we asked him that similar question, like, well, do I want it to go 40 years? If you decided that your area has fulfilled its function after 10 years when your mangoes are at their prime, and you want to go back to mango, you can do it. He doesn't do it that way.
That's still okay with his.
Yeah, as long as you're sticking with the function of the plant. The one difference is like I said, he's got 1,000 hectares. He's got some land to play with. You know, he's got areas that he is letting go to climax, and then his cacao areas. I mean, he's managing that for chocolate production, and his bananas for banana production. It's not quite the same. Just throw everything out there and let it go for 100 years. So he's got some wiggle room there, but it doesn't have to go to climax. No.
It's amazing that you can really see the difference. Like when you travel down the road and you enter Ernst Land, suddenly like the temperature goes down. It's cool. It's shady. You can smell the moisture in the air. Just suddenly it seems like a place where you actually want to be. And you leave and it's like just hot, dry, and not very pleasant. And unfortunately, like Ethan said, that's most of what it's like down there in that region. Any more questions?
Andy, though, to go a little bit, we were walking around, and I don't know if he has, like we said, 2,000 or 3,000 acres or whatever. He'll walk around, we're at this one spot, and he's just like, and this tree's gonna go because it's done this, and this tree's gonna go, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna plant here, and then I'm probably gonna cut down that tree like halfway and let it fall over there, and then take that tree out. And we're like, this was just some random spot in this field that he probably hasn't been to in a year, you know what I mean? But just by looking at it, but he wouldn't use it for lumber probably, which if you were kind of headed in that direction, I kind of mentioned that to him, and it doesn't make sense to him. There's really no mills. He has no purpose for it. It would probably just lay there and be used as habitat.
Okay, well, one more. Yeah, I know.
When you were on polyculture areas of land, did you get to see much wildlife?
No.
I saw an armadillo.
You did?
Yeah, and monkeys.
Oh, yeah, we saw monkeys like the first day.
And hummingbirds.
Lots of Oh, right.
Hummingbird taking a bath.
Cicadas, these grasshoppers that are like this big, that if we were you to me away and the cicada started doing its thing, it's kind of like, when we were first driving in, we're driving in on top of a van, and it's a bumpy road, and the van is clanking, and we're going however fast we are, and way down there in this ravine, this cicada was going, and I was like, is that a chainsaw? Someone cutting it down? So from like us away, we would have to be yelling at each other to hear each other. But really, there wasn't much fun.
In general, in the jungle, the animals are not that easy to spot. You're right there in the middle of the as I was right after this trip. It's just you. Just lots of little things that are
In the beginning of the presentation, somebody was talking about 4 to 7%, is that correct, of the forest land remaining?
Yeah.
Is there any talk of creating these climax forests? It just sounds like, you're probably not creating the species that were there in the forests pre-harvest. Is there any talk of leaving some of that alone, obtaining more of the lands just to get some coverage and moving on to different areas?
That's a great question. In the area around where Uli and Ernst are, they were in the process. They had a small portion that they turned into some form of reserve, and they were pushing for more that was surviving area.
And no humans were even allowed to go in there.
Yeah, it's hands-off stuff. The people that we were there with, like Uli and Ernst, what they're primarily interested in, like Ari was saying, is just getting some forest back there to stop the continued degradation of it. And once there's forest there, it would probably be easier to bring back native vegetation. I agree. It would be great if 40% of it came back in native vegetation as opposed to agroforests. But that's their way of, as quickly as possible, stopping the erosion, stopping the further slide into desertification, beach sand, forest.
Can I ask what percentage of ownership is private of that land? Do you know what the breakdown of ownership of those areas are?
I don't. Does anybody else know that?
I mean, in general, like Britta had that statistic of 3% of Brazil owns 67% of land. That's just Brazil, as a whole. I'm not sure what it is in that forested area.
Probably Plum Creek land or something.
Probably a similar ratio, I think. Anything else? Well, thank you all again for coming.